Well, thank you for joining me. You're here to talk about how big issue vendors are being provided with free data amid the cost of living crisis. And I think this is a really good scheme because we're in a position really now where so many people are struggling.
Definitely, vendors that have the facility to take or that can facilitate contactless payments sell up to 30% more issues, which is obviously important when you're out there selling copies of the big issue to people. I think there's a bigger issue here, no pun intended, and that's connectivity. People who are already isolated, who are homeless, sleeping rough, hidden homeless, sofa surfing, whatever their situation may be, they're going through a hell of a lot and already experience a lot of isolation. To be further isolated, to not have access to information or any kind of support network, I think, this helps solve and remedy as well. So I think it's a great thing that Virgin Media O2 are doing.
It most certainly is. I mean, I spoke to Scarlett Moffat not so long ago, former Queen of the Jungle, and she was running a campaign with free to box up old phones and give them to people due to the importance of being able to connect digitally.
It's such a good thing to do, and I would encourage people to do the same. And that actually has made me want to go and look through drawers and find old phones and give them to people who might need them. We take so many things for granted, not least of all connectivity. We probably use our phones too much. To think about having that, people get anxious just for leaving their phone at home and being without it for an hour. Imagine not having a phone or having any way of staying in contact with people.
I suppose over the last few years, the climate has been becoming ever more difficult to live in. And amidst the cost of living crisis, I think reality is setting for a lot of people that we are in genuinely tough times. And do you think that reality has helped almost create a sense of community with people wanting to help each other? Because I know your research has showed that people are willing to buy the big issue to help a good cause.
Yeah, I think, I hope that's what comes of it. I think there's some other stuff that's going to come of it as well that is not so positive. You've got a lot of people that are encountering, financial stress and debt for the first time, which is an incredibly scary thing to experience, I would imagine. There are people that have suffered it their whole lives. How I grew up and where I grew up, give or take, everyone was going through varying degrees of the same thing. We didn't have much. But that wasn't amidst a cost of living crisis. That was just how things were for us. And I think things are ever just, I don't think, I know things are getting worse for people. People have this idea and image of people who access food banks. They would imagine that it's homeless people who need to access food banks, but that's not really the case. Or, all too often it's dual income households that simply can't afford to cover the cost of everything. And when you find yourself, or when we find ourselves as a society in that situation, you have to think about the knock-on effect and then how hard it becomes for people to perhaps buy copies of the big issue or to make donations to other charities. It becomes really, really difficult and everyone is affected. In the same sense, I think we need to look at homelessness as a problem that is a societal problem and not just a problem for the people who are homeless, because it affects everyone.
You mentioned there where you grew up. Is that what sparked your passion for wanting to help people and bring light to these sort of issues?
Definitely, it was, I mean, it walked me into making the documentaries that I made around the hidden homeless and the like. It's something I do care about, and it's things that, I never experienced homelessness when I was growing, not at any point in my life, but I saw people who did, friends that were very dear to me. In some instances, it was whole families that were in bed sits. But when I was growing up and, a family who I knew who were homeless for a period, they were in a bed sit, but were moved into permanent accommodation. That doesn't happen so much anymore.
Yeah, we are most certainly in difficult times. And I know as part of what you're doing, you went to go meet a big issue vendor. So could you talk me through that experience and what you learned?
Yeah, Kelvin is a great guy, but like many people who I've spoken to, or everyone I've spoken to who is or has been homeless at some point in their life, he's suffered, everything that anyone who has been or is homeless suffers. I got into, I guess, activism by way of mental health, and mental health is something that's incredibly impacted when people are homeless. And how could it not be? The instability, the insecurity, the fear of not knowing where you're going to sleep, of not knowing what's going to happen to you when you do sleep. For most of us, we have the luxury of being able to lock our door of a night and get into a bed. Not having that security would make you feel incredibly vulnerable. How could your mental health not be impacted?
I can understand 100% that people's mental health is all over the place. I mean, with the cost of living, more and more people are being forced into a position where they could become homeless, which is why it's important that we have all these things available, like warm hubs and like the scheme you're running with British Gas, which allows people to come in and learn money saving skills.
Yeah, the British Gas Energy Trust are doing great things, not least of all offering grants of up to £1,500 for people who have existing energy debt, checking benefit entitlement, making sure they're accessing all of the support that they can access. And for a lot of people, it's really easy with debt, with isolation comes a feeling of shame. And with that, it's all too easy to put your head in the sand and to not access the support that is out there, whether it's financial support you need or emotional support. It's important for people to access support, whatever it is they need, especially when it comes to their mental health, because we know, where in the most severe cases that can end up.
100%. I mean, there's so much stigma surrounding mental health, which, thankfully seems to be evaporating over the last few years. And there's still that stigma surrounding food banks. What would your advice be to somebody who perhaps feels shame that they definitely shouldn't feel about being in that type of position?
It's so easy for me to sit here and say you shouldn't be ashamed. You're in the situation you're in and you're doing all you can to get out of it and you're getting by however you have to, in the same way that my family did when I was growing up. I'm talking from a place of incredible privilege now, and I recognize that. I'm not here pleading poverty, but it's really important that people don't isolate themselves or further isolate themselves. Again, which comes back to connectivity. If you do with that shame isolate yourself and don't talk to anyone, problems manifest. And when they exist between your two ears, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I know this from my own stuff. If I don't vocalize things, if I don't get them up and out, if I don't do something as simple as just writing down how I feel, what I think, or what I observe at any given point, things can manifest and they get bigger and bigger. But actually, when you get them up and out, they become more manageable. So I would encourage anyone to find a safe space to talk.
There's a lot of people like yourself who are wanting to go out to help people. What would your advice be to somebody who doesn't exactly know what they can do to help? What route should they take?
Wanting to help is a great start. Align yourself with a charity that's aligned with what you care about, that you can align yourself with because you are aligned, and do the work. If you have the time, if you have the time and energy to spare, then please do what you can. I'm patron of Calm, Campaign Against Living Miserably, which is a charity that is specifically aimed at reducing the number of male suicides, of which there are far too many. Um, I did all those documentaries years ago, and the sad thing about it is that they're as if not more relevant now because statistically things are worse than they were then.
They are. I mean, I did a piece for Com the other week about Declan Rice taking on invisible opponents. I think that followed on from Tyson Fury. They took footage of his fight with Deontay Wilder, edited it, so it was essentially like he was taking punches from somebody who's not there. That sums up the fact that with mental health, you can't see it. Like cancer, you can see, like all these things we know they're there. With mental health, everybody's on this journey. We never know how our friends are doing.
Not really. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around it as well. Life is difficult. It's not always easy. And a few bad decisions and things can start to feel really, really unmanageable, and it becomes harder and harder to make the good decisions, which will make things more manageable and which will improve your mental health. We have this thing with mental health and physical health, and this idea that they're two separate things, but they're not. They're intrinsically linked. It's just health. We are a person. It's one body. Body and mind, they exist together. They're not separate, and your physical health, poor physical health can impact mental health. Poor mental health can impact physical health. Some people struggle to get out of bed. How can you encourage someone to exercise when they're struggling just to put one foot in front of the other? But for me, that's the most important thing, is putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, and then day by day, as those endorphins build, it just gets easier. And I think people forget that. They see themselves in this hole and they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it is there.
Yeah, and with isolation as well, you see yourself too often. You begin to overanalyze things and catastrophize. And again, things start to manifest when you're isolated, when you're not. And you can be amongst people and be isolated if you're not open and you're not sharing the traumas of your situation, your stress. And sometimes you feel like you don't even have a right to feel how you feel, but feelings are valid. They shouldn't be invalidated. How you feel is how you feel. And it's important to, you can't always expect your friends to understand. They're not always the right people to talk to. So if you're feeling any which way, it's important to access services where there are professionals who will give you unbiased help, where you can talk confidentially.
Definitely important to get that help. And I think that everything you're doing, whether it's promoting selling of the big issue and helping people out, in any way you can. It's incredibly important.
Issue is unbiased media as well, which is really difficult to find nowadays. So if you do see a vendor selling the big issue, know that you're doing something good, but you're also getting a good read as well. So get your card out and contactlessly pay your £4. And big up Virgin Media O2 for supplying all of the big issues with SIM cards and 12 months of data, so as they can receive contactless payments and stay connected.
Staying connected, I think, is the most important part, because it connects to what you're saying in terms of being isolated is the worst thing a person can be if they're dealing with mental health, and staying connected helps them.
It does. And I think, taking on becoming a big issue vendor, you're putting yourself out amongst people, having to engage with people. You're not just helping your day. Quite often you're helping the people that you bump into. Seeing how Kelvin, the big issue vendor that I met with yesterday, was interacting with people, and not everyone's that polite or that kind. Some people don't seem to have the time in their day, and some people may not, but you don't know what anyone's gone through. And his optimism, he called himself an eternal optimist, and that was incredibly inspiring, because he gets up and he gets out and he gets amongst people and he interacts with his community. And he's like, he's laughing. He's like, I should charge people as a therapist, because of the conversations that he has. Sometimes it's you find, in those conversations that you have randomly, if you're open to having those conversations, the places you unload and find happiness are sometimes the strangest of places. It's like when you go to the hairdressers, it's like, am I at the hairdressers or is this a therapy session? Because all of a sudden I feel much lighter for having discussed everything. Don't know who looks after the hairdressers, but
who knows? Maybe that's something where I must interview a hairdresser another time and ask who looks after them. But thank you for joining me, because I think what you said is incredibly powerful, and I'm going to take a lot of it on board going forward. But before I let you go, is there anything that you'd like to add that you feel I haven't mentioned and that the people really need to know?
No, but just take time. It's really easy to get so bogged down by everything in your own life that you don't have time for anyone, let alone strangers. And it's important that we engage with each other, especially during this time when things are horrendous. It's important that I think we encourage community to grow again. We seem so divided at times. It's really important that we start to connect with each other again.